Hello everyone, welcome back to the course on Health Humanities, Indian and Western Medical Knowledge Traditions. This is lecture number 36 on Introduction to Disability Studies. In this lecture, I will talk about what is disability studies, what are its key definitions, what are its key terms, and how different government bodies or international bodies have defined disability studies. I will talk about the language used for the people with disabilities. I will talk about the idea of identity and some of the major themes about disability studies. In this lecture, I will talk about what disability studies means and how it has been shaped and developed through times. So the question like what is disability studies? Disability studies is an interdisciplinary field and it deals with complex and multifaceted concepts that generally refer to a condition which are physical, mental, sensory, cognitive, emotional, and that may limit a person's movement, senses, or activities. So disability is not just some kind of a physical thing. It is mental, it is sensory, cognitive, and emotional. It is uh, also social, cultural, as well as physical and individual. So to understand disability, one has to look from different perspectives. It can be the individual specific approach, which is called medical model, and then from social and cultural perspective, which is called a social model, and then one has to think about a psychosocial model and some other models as well. So disability studies is based upon different factors which affects a person's vision, movement, thinking, remembering, learning, communication, hearing, mental health, and social relationships. So disability is not of a single type, rather it is of multiple types, and it can have a range of features which gets affected. And when one thinks about the role of disability and how they get influenced, then one has to focus on the aspect of culture, society, politics, economics, and so many other dimensions of disability. Moreover, disability is also related with the intersectionality of gender, race, class, caste, etc. So disability is not something which is individual specific, but we have a lot of discourses, forces that shape the experiences of disability. Disability is something which has been socially and culturally given, and it is something which is based upon the experiences which a person is having. It is not about one's physical or mental condition, which is often called impairment. So when we think about the key concepts, key definitions, one has to begin by differentiating impairment and disability. What is the difference between impairment and disability? Impairment is lacking part or all of a limb, or having a defective limb, organism, or mechanism of body. So impairment is physical condition or mental condition where a person is having a defective limb, or it can be where a person is having certain kind of mental weaknesses. And the impact of impairment is called impairment effects, and the impairment effects are something which is based upon one's experiences of impairment. So impairment affect the direct and unavoidable impacts that impairment, which can be physical, sensory, intellectual, and emotional, have on individuals' embodied functioning in the social world. So impairment effect has the direct and unavoidable impact on the physical, sensory, intellectual, and emotional aspect of the individual's personality. Impairment and impairment effects are always biosocial and culturally constructed in the character, and may occur at any stage in the life, of course, or in the course of life. So what we find over here, that impairment effect has a very broad concern, and it is biosocial and culturally constructed. It is not fully physical or biological. So impairment is biological, but the effects of impairment are biosocial and cultural. It is political. And so what we need to understand, that we need to differentiate between impairment and the experiences of impairment. So impairment can be physical, it can be mental, but the experiences of impairment can be socio-cultural and political. When we think about disability, then disability is the disadvantage or restriction of activity caused by contemporary social organization, which takes no or little account of people who have physical impairments and thus exclude them from the mainstream of society, social activity. So disability is something social, something cultural, and it restricts a person's movement. It excludes a person from the mainstream society or mainstream social activity. Disability is something which has been socially given, culturally assigned to the person. It is not something which is by birth, or it is something which is by nature, or it is because of some kind of physical features. Disability is something which has been historically constructed, socially constructed. Disability is something which has been assigned by human beings to other human beings. For example, when a person is not able to climb on the stairs, the problem is not in the person but in the architecture, that the architecture is built in such a way which prohibits the people who have some kind of physical impairment. It means the building lacks ramps, it lacks other means, it lacks lifts which can bring the person on the top floors. Disability is something which have been assigned to the person. It is the social or cultural experience which one is having. And when we think about disabilism, disabilism refers to the social imposition or avoidable restrictions on the life activities, aspirations, and psycho-emotional well-being of people, categorized as impaired by those deemed normal. Disabilism is social, relational in character, and constitutes a form of social oppression in contemporary society, alongside sexism, racism, ageism, and homophobia. As well as enacted in person-to-person interactions, disabilism may manifest itself in institutionalized and other socio-structural forms. So disabilism is social relational in character. It is not something given in the individual body. Disabilism is a form of oppression which is similar to other forms of oppression, which can be sexism, racism, ageism, or homophobia. And it can be enacted in the person-to-person interactions, or it can be practiced on a group of people. So disability and disabilism, they are not physical or mental, rather they are what a people experience or how they get excluded and oppressed in the society. So disabilism and disability is something which requires the change and transformation in one's mindset and the transformation in the society, because they need to consider the people with impairment in different manners. They need to think about their needs, and hence disability and disabilism are the restrictions which are imposed upon the people of impairment, but they can be avoidable, they can be reconsidered, which can help the people to monitor their life in a better way. So when a person is prohibiting another person because of some kind of impairment, and then saying like, you being a disabled, you cannot do this. So this like idea of restriction is disability. So disability is social and cultural, not physical. It is impairment which is physical. When we look at the definition of disability by the World Health Organization, according to World Health Organization, disability has 3 dimensions: impairment, activity limitation, and participation restrictions. Impairment means it is a loss or abnormality in body structure or function or mental functioning. So impairment is something which is about the loss or abnormality or weakness in bodies. It can be the particular limb, let's say a hand or leg. So it's some kind of loss or abnormality in body. It can be also about the weakness in mental functioning. The second limitation is a dimension is activity limitation, and this activity limitation can be in terms of difficulty in seeing, hearing, walking, or problem solving at individual level. Suppose a person is not able to listen or hear or walk, so this is the activity limitation, and where his or her activities get suffer or they suffer. And then the third component of disability is participation restrictions, where it suggests the difficulty in engaging in life roles, for example, daily activities, social activities, employment, which means when a person who is excluded are not allowed to continue or carry out their daily activities, or they are not allowed to carry out their social activities, they are denied any kind of job opportunities. So these are the participation restrictions which have been put upon the people who are having some kind of impairment. United Nations has defined disability as a long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder a person's full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities consider that disability is a long term, and it's not a short term. It's a long term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairments. What we need to emphasize over here, that it emphasizes on the impairment, and which can prohibit, which can hinder, which can limit a person's full and effective participation in the society, which other people are not having, or which other people are not prohibited. The other concerns about disability is about how a person experiences disability, and what are the ways through which people with disability can be discussed and described. So whom should language address? It is the person first, or it is disability first. And there are debates which some of them argue that there should be people first language, others argue that there should be identity first language. And those who are in favor of person first language or people first language, they think that person comes first and disability is secondary to the person, because the humanity prevails, and being a human, everything is secondary. And when we look at the conventions or different acts, it can be the Americans with a Disability Act, or the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, or Indian Disability Act. They prefer people first language, people centric language, and they use, for example, a person with disability, a person with impairment, a person with autism, a person with schizophrenia. Their entire focus is on the person, that person comes first, and impairment or disability is secondary. They can use like a wheelchair user. The person of first language prefers wheelchair user. It talks about that the person is having control of the wheelchair. And those who are favoring identity first, they think that one has to actually assert one's identity to get some kind of social recognition, to get their rights in the society, to get their rights in the political system. So there are different activists and NGOs who advocate identity first language. For example, identity first language is central to Disabled People's Organization, Disabled People's International Decision Organization, Disabled People's International, and then the US Association on Higher Education and Disability. It is also central to the social model approach, because they consider that the problem is in the society, it is in the culture, in the law, in the politics, and hence one has to assert their identity. So they prefer the word disabled person instead of a person with disability. So those who prefer people of first language, they would call a person with disability, and those who prefer identity, they will claim disabled person. And this believe that assertion of identity is more important, because it is the identity through it is because of identity that they have been excluded. They have not given due rights, due positions in the society. So when we think about the people first language, this is from Cerebral Policy, a guide for care, which says when identifying a person with disability, a person's name or pronoun should come first, and descriptions of disability should be used so that the disability is identified but is not modifying the person. Acceptable examples include a woman with Down syndrome or a man who has schizophrenia. It also states that a person's adaptive equipment should be described functionally as something that assists a person, not as something that limits a person. For example, a woman who uses a wheelchair rather than a woman in or confined to a wheelchair. So what we find over here, that the entire focus is on the person, and it can be like the name, the pronoun should be put first, not the disability. And the examples which is given, for example, a woman with a Down syndrome. So Down syndrome is secondary, schizophrenia is secondary, and wheelchair is secondary. It is the person who is first. And the purpose over here is to give adequate and enough space to the human being to consider them as a human being, to consider them equal to other human beings, not as something that they are secondary or someone who is having inferior identity. Rather, they are having all the human qualities. Human or person approach should be given first. When we think about the idea of person and identity, then there are like debates about that. So those who are like focusing upon person, they believe that humanity should prevail and everyone is equal. But those who prefer identity, they believe that it is the identity because of which they are marginalized, and hence to assert one's identity is very important to get equitable and equal position in the society, in the culture. The identity first language users talk about that identity is very important. An artistic blogger and activist named Lydia Brown, he says that or he asserts about the concerns of identity first language, and then he says that in the autism community, many self-advocates and their allies prefer terminologies such as autistic person, autistic person, or autistic individual, because we understand autism as an inherent part of an individual's identity. The same way one refers to Muslims, African Americans, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, Chinese, gifted, athletic, or Jewish. So the way a person like who is like let's say lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. Similarly, there are people who are autistic, the people who are disabled, the people who are having certain kind of visual or other kind of impairments. So they advocate their identity first in order to get equal recognition in the society. And when we think or when we look at the people around us, maybe in the what you call local languages, native languages, there are a lot of terminology or words which are used negatively for the people who are disabled, who are having impairment. And hence one has to consider identity first when one has to assert about one's space in the society, one's space in the culture. The key themes and key concerns in disability studies are the identity and lived experiences of the people who are disabled, who are having impairment. So how their identity has been shaped, how their identity has been constructed, and what are their experiences. In most of the society, the people who are disabled, they have been given marginal positions. Or when we look at their representation in literature, then we find that they are not given sufficient space. The idea of their identity, their experiences are formulated, constructed, and judged as per the heteronormative norms, as per the normative hegemonic world order. So their identity has been decided as per the norms, and those norms are able-centric. Moreover, when one has to discuss and consider about disability, one has to think about the condition of disabled in terms of their race, the experiences of disability in terms of gender, because a male person can experience disability differently than a female person, in terms of the class, in terms of their economic conditions. So the people like who are poor, they may not have the access to all kind of contemporary machine advancement, all kind of technology advancements. So their experiences of disability may be different than those who are rich. one has to think about the representation of disabled people in media and literature. In this regard, one has to consider about how disabled people have been seen as a medium to continue the main plot, the main story, and they are only as a means to carry out the plot. Otherwise, they have been given the secondary status. So in this regard, one has to consider about what Otto Quasson says about aesthetic nervousness, or what Michel and Snyder says about uh, uh, aesthetic nervousness and narrative prosthesis. So Quasson's idea of aesthetic nervousness and Michel and Snyder's idea of narrative prosthesis are very important to understand the concept of the representation of disabled people in literature, media, and other discourses. Further, one has to think about, consider the rights of the people who are disabled and what are the laws and how they have been addressed and how they have been dealt with. The idea of ableism and normalcy are very pulling concepts. They actually pull back the disabled people. In this regard, one has to consider what Leonard Davis says about ableism and normalcy. Ableism and normalcy are socially created concepts. They are culturally created concepts, and they limit, they prohibit the people who are disabled. When we look at the disabled people historically, then there are different perspectives in the pre-modern period, which is called religious approach, the model of religious practices. They consider disability as the consequences of the actions of the past. So religious model believes in karma and the sina are karma and punishment. So if somebody has done something wrong, and so their disability is a means of their punishment. And during industrial era, there is institutionalization of disability, and where different approaches and models have emerged. For example, a medical model or social model. And then in contemporary times, the idea is further expanded to the rights of disabled people and how they can be included in the society. The question of why disability studies matters, why it is important. It is important because it promotes inclusion and equality in the society. It challenges the stereotypes and the stigma about the people who are disabled. It challenges the discriminatory practices in the society and provides them equal positions, equal status. Disability informs public policy and social justice. It helps to shape public policy, which are not only centered around the people who are normal, so-called normal, rather it also deals with the people who are disabled, who are having impairment, and in this way it asserts social justice. Further, disability studies enhances understanding in education, healthcare, and it provides a new means of representing disabled people in the arts, in the literature, in the culture. So to conclude, disability studies bridges the gap between the abled and the disabled world, and hence it benefits the both who are so-called normal and those who are disabled. Disability studies encourages inclusive, holistic, and comprehensive understanding of the people who are disabled. It further promotes better healthcare, policy matters, and educational outcomes. It also supports anti-ableism and social justice in the society. In this way, disability studies is a discourse which is not only meant for the people who are disabled, rather it is about sensitizing the people. It is also educating the people that how they consider the people who are disabled, and it also provides a new approach in terms of the policy, in terms of healthcare practices, in terms of educational policies, and so many other social and cultural initiatives where people are given equal status and equal opportunities. So disability studies is about equity and equality. It is about inclusion. It is about the rights of the people who are disabled. So here I end this lecture. Thank you.